Now, if someone wants to discover what Jesus really said and did here in the Holy Land 2,000 years ago, what historical evidence can they turn to? Well, as Peter Jennings pointed out, all scholars turn to the earliest books written about Jesus, and that's the four Gospels. And right here, the debate about Jesus begins. What kind of books are the Gospels? Can we trust them?
Well, where you begin with your oldest sources, your oldest and most reliable sources. And we've got them. We have four Gospels in the New Testament.
And if we want to deal with the historicity of Jesus, then we have to immerse ourselves into the tools that are there for examining that. That includes the Gospels, the literary texts. It includes extra-biblical material as well, writings of other Jewish authors like Josephus. It includes archaeology and a study of biblical languages like Hebrew and Greek.
Now, some scholars claim that the writers of the four Gospels were passionately biased followers of Jesus. Therefore, it is doubtful that they accurately reported what happened.
In the ancient world, nobody had yet invented the notion of objective, dispassionate chronicling of history simply for history's sake. They wouldn't bother to retell the story of somebody if they didn't feel there was something that could be learned from it.
You can have history and theology together. Just think of the word perspective instead of theology. What the Gospels give us is the perspective of disciples and those who believed Jesus in terms of what he did and said. And granted, they have a bias, if you want to use that word. They have a prejudice. They are believers. There's no doubt about it. But they are trying to convince the reader this is who Jesus was, this is what he did, and in fact, this is who he is as well in the process.
Simply because somebody believes passionately in a subject that they tell about doesn't by any means necessarily mean that they'll distort the facts. Sometimes the reverse is the case. A great modern-day example are many Jewish historians of the Nazi Holocaust who've been passionately committed to never seeing such an atrocity reduplicated, and for that very reason they have very carefully and accurately chronicled the horrors in a way that the so-called revisionist historians, mostly Gentile, trying to downplay the atrocities, have not done so.
And so just because the New Testament gospel writers have a theological interest, and that's what drives them to tell the story of Jesus in the first place, that doesn't disqualify their writing. It doesn't make it suddenly unhistorical or of no value.
What would you say to a person who's really skeptical and says that Matthew didn't write Matthew, Mark didn't write Mark, Luke didn't write Luke, and John didn't write John?
Sum total of the evidence that we have from the early church fathers is that the four men, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, that the New Testament is typically ascribed to, two of them apostles, Matthew and John, two of them companions of apostles, Mark and Luke, are in fact the people who wrote the stories about Jesus.